oVRdark might be PlayStation VR2's newest game, but the story of its development goes all the way back to 2020, when a developer, then known as Quasar Dynamics, announced that their new horror escape room game Do Not Open would be coming to PlayStation 4 and PSVR1. And although the flat screen version did come out eventually, the puzzles, which relied heavily on math and numbers, just wouldn't have worked for VR. I had a pencil and paper out for a good chunk of the game and I still struggled to get through it. So it's to our benefit that the developers, now renamed as Nox Noctis, went back to the drawing board and created a sequel that was built from the ground up for VR, puzzles and all. If you didn't play Do Not Open, I wouldn't worry too much. Despite including a few cutscenes, a few phone calls, and characters that aren't terribly well explained, the story here is 100% unimportant. In fact, the setup is only here to get you inside the house and then give you an excuse not to leave until you find your missing wife and daughter. At least, I think that's who you're looking for. It might be someone else's wife and daughter. It doesn't really matter. And honestly, I don't care. I love any excuse to be stuck inside of a haunted house. And if you're a fan of classic horror games and movies, you're gonna love all of it. The references to Blair Witch, Amityville, and even The Evil Dead, the amateurish voiceovers, the mismatched subtitles, and how, again, unless I missed something, not everything is totally explained. It's all incredibly forgivable though, because when you walk into this mansion, it's hard not to appreciate the resolution, lighting, and normally pretty solid frame rate. It's running at 120 reprojected, but despite being sensitive to reprojection, I'd never know it. Most of oVRdark comes off as really smooth, which makes the times the game stutters a bit, which I'd estimate is around 20 to 30% of the time, far more noticeable. True to its name, some of the areas here are extremely dark, and you'll be using a flashlight to navigate from room to room a lot, but I didn't see even a trace of Murrah. The detail in the environments is admirable too. I'd say it's roughly on the level of Paranormal Activity, but with a slightly bigger mansion and a lot more items scattered around that you can interact with. In other words, this is a good looking game. But what are we really doing in oVRdark? Well, pay attention, because I think this more than anything else will determine if oVRdark is for you. Because first and foremost, this is a puzzle game. You'll be sliding statues onto metal plates, putting fuses in fuse boxes, looking for keys, unlocking a ton of doors, and very, very little else in between. And there's no map here either. Not that you should need one, the mansion's not all that big. But personally, I have zero sense of direction, so remembering how all these hallways and rooms connected didn't go all that well for me, resulting in long stretches of time where I was wandering aimlessly, not sure where to go or even how to get to the place I knew I needed to get to. Which means that even though it took me just over 4 hours to finish oVRdark, I'm betting some people will fly through this one much, much faster. I jumped in today to check out the day one patch, and knowing all the key locations and puzzle solutions, I felt like I could have blasted through the entire game in about an hour. So outside of a few collectibles that you might have missed the first time, there's not exactly a lot of replayability here either. Okay, I hear the horror fans out there screaming, but Brian, how scary is it? And I've got to tell you, it's not that scary. You're in a creepy mansion and the sound design will keep you on your toes for the first hour or so, until you realize they're reusing a lot of the same ambient, tension-building effects, like the sound of someone tapping on a window when you walk by. To the point where it's almost expected. There's so much more they could have added, like the sounds of footsteps coming downstairs, floorboards creaking, or even making the lights flicker here and there to make you think the power's about to go out. There's really endless potential. The big mechanic they included that I'm torn on is what happens when the big monster, oVRdark's antagonist, shows up. You're told not to move your head or hands until he disappears, or he'll come kill you. And unfortunately, these segments feel a bit shoehorned in. They're scripted, so once you've seen them, you know exactly where they'll show up. The screen even briefly fades to black to let you know what's happening. The adaptive triggers aren't used at all to my recollection, and even though the haptics could have been used more often, when they are used, they're used really, really effectively. oVRdark, a do-not open story, comes off as a little bit of a mixed bag, and it's not groundbreaking in any way. It's light on horror and super heavy on puzzles. But what it does really well. And if this is the level of polish and graphical detail we can expect from indie VR horror games this generation, well, I'm all in.